baptized.
Jhon, do you believe that a prophet of God like Joseph Smith could ever be wrong on any of his prophecies?
Oh, for sure.
Deuteronomy says it shouldn't be, cannot be that way.
Yeah, well, Joseph Smith was a mortal man, and he had weaknesses.
No,
and
his prophecies.
And who are we to judge Joseph Smith? I'm not going to judge the man, but he had weaknesses.
The Bible says you should judge a prophet. The Bible says you have to know whether that prophet is speaking from the Lord or from himself. So you do believe that Joseph Smith could have a false prophecy?
Well, I wouldn't say false prophecy, but I was reading the other day in Journal of Wilford Woodruff, volume 4 or 5, I think it was, when the question was raised in the Quorum of the 12, back in the days of Brigham Young and that, did Joseph Smith ever contradict himself on doctrine? And the answer was yes, and it had to do with the question, do children grow up in the spirit world, or do they stay the same? And his first response at some point, again undated and unsigned, was that yes, they do grow up and mature. Then later on, he said, no, they don't. They remain the same. Whatever age they die, they remain the same. Then finally, later, he said that he really didn't know because he had not been given a revelation on that. And so the thing is that, and I cite that as an example from the man that I love, yes, he contradicted himself on many things, because what the world doesn't realize is that the restored gospel, vulgarly called Mormonism, and that is an ongoing process. It's an evolutionary process, and it changes according to the needs and times of the place. Let's look at baptism for the dead.
No, I'm sorry. It was my fault. I probably wasn't clear enough. I was only speaking about prophecies, whether or not a temple would be built in Kirtland, whether or not the circumcision was correct, because Joseph Smith, we discussed earlier, did correct
You know the history of the Civil War prophecy.
Actually, Thomas Jefferson, long before Joseph Smith was born, predicted the breakup of the United States. So can we take those two, building of the temple in Kirtland and the prophecy?
Well, the temple in Kirtland was built.
Okay, let's.
Nauvoo.
It was independence. Okay, let's go to Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. We spoke about that at lunch, how Joseph Smith corrected the Abrahamic covenant from 8 days, which Jesus Christ, all the prophets who are now paying homage to Joseph Smith. You're telling me that Joseph Smith corrected the basic covenant that God had with Abraham from 8 days to 8 years, and you believe that is not a mistake?
I believe that God had a right to inspire Joseph Smith to change that in the inspired translation. It was God who inspired Joseph Smith. If God had a right to do that, then who are we to question that?
That's true, but is your church, or is your belief a logical belief?
Oh, absolutely.
Then what
from my perspective, yes, but it would be illogical to you.
From your perspective, is it logical that the entire Jewish nation throughout all history of time has done the basic Abrahamic covenant wrong?
Well, God has a right to change his mind, and he had a right to change Joseph Smith's mind.
Right, until God gets a chance to sit at that microphone, I'm asking you if that is logical within your church framework.
It is illogical with man, but what may be illogical with man is logical with God, and what he did there, telling Joseph Smith to make that change, God had every right to do that.
Do you believe Joseph Smith lied about his practice, his activities in polygamy?
Well, the history shows that he did.
So Joseph Smith did lie.
The history shows that he did.
Could you say that could you admit to that in your next temple interview?
I've never been asked a question.
No, I understand that. But you are asked this question. Are you honest in your dealings with your fellow men?
I try to be as best I can.
Do you think Joseph Smith was honest in his dealings with his fellow men?
I think so far as the circumstance allowed him to, yes, he was.
So if you have a child who goes off to college, do you tell them, dear son or daughter, I want you to be as honest as you can as far as the circumstances will allow? That depends on whether or not you go to BYU or you go to Florida State or you go to Connecticut. Would you really give those instructions to your son or daughter that I want you to be honest as far as the circumstances will allow you?
As far as they're able to, and as much as the truth in them allows to be.
So